Welcome to the Mining and Metallurgy Society of America webinar series. MMSA is an association of mineral resource professionals whose members represent all facets of the mining and metallurgical interests, both domestic and internationally. MMSA has always been a cohesive group of senior people from the mineral industry. The society is dedicated to increasing public awareness and understanding about mining and why mined materials are essential to the modern society and human well-being. The Society concerns itself with fundamental principles and with problems facing the industry in such areas as legislation, economics and education, as well as environmental concerns, labor relations, and health and safety. Representatives of the Society from time to time testify before legislative bodies and provide advice to federal agencies. I am Kristen Guerin-Davy, MMSA member and the new social media and webinar director. I'll be introducing the webinar today. The title of today's webinar is What You Should Know About the National Instrument 43-101 and Beyond by Victoria Yehl. She works for the BC Securities Commission Manager in Mining. Questions can be entered into the chat, and the speaker will answer the questions after the presentation is completed. I'll now hand it over to Curtis.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you, Kristen. Yes, we're very pleased today to have Victoria join us from Vancouver. And as Kristen mentioned, Victoria is a manager mining at the BC Securities Commission, which she joined in 2016 as a senior geologist. Her work at the commission has included development of advanced analytics for the commission mining team, participation in policy work, and presentation of many short courses and lectures on National Instrument 43-101, such as we're doing today. Prior to the commission, Victoria spent over 20 years with a senior tier transnational mining company. Her experience in the exploration and mining industry is global, covering the full range of exploration, production, and business development for multiple commodities. Victoria is committed to the industry through extensive volunteering with the Vancouver Mining Exploration Group, the Association for Mineral Exploration, which puts on the Roundup Conference every January, and various roles within the Geological Association of Canada, to name some. Victoria holds a Bachelor of Science in Geology from the University of Toronto, a Master of Science in Geology from Queen's University in Kingston, Ontario, Canada, and a Graduate Diploma in Business Administration Mining from Simon Fraser University in Vancouver. And of course, she is also registered as a professional geoscientist with the Engineers and Geoscientists of British Columbia. We're very enthused to have Victoria join us again to give us an update of what she observes and her team observes at the commission, at the BCSC, and I hand it over to Victoria now.
Some of these slides might be familiar to a few of you, but this is a little bit of a different spin because we haven't presented to MMSA since 2021, but really happy to come back. Last time it was very dynamic and we had just a ton of questions and it was absolutely fantastic. As per with any presentation, the commission would like me to tell you that these are my views, not theirs. So if I get it wrong, blame me and only me. Just a quick discussion of what we're going to talk about today. I hope to give you a good reminder of what National Instrument 43-101 is, its principles, some of the most common disclosure problems that we see, and what's happening next. Curtis asked me at the beginning, what's 43-101 and beyond? Well, hopefully there's some changes coming, and there's changes coming in multiple areas. I hope to be able to talk about those a little bit at the end of the presentation. One of the first things people ask is, why do we have things like National Instrument 43-101, which is standards for disclosure about mining, and it's because mining is risky. There are lots of abilities for people to lie to the public, to mislead the public, to cause issues. So there are mining disclosure rules to prevent or hopefully reduce that so that everybody gets a consistent message. The idea of regulating mineral project disclosure is to protect investors and maintain the integrity of the capital markets. If you haven't seen this slide before, on the right that is actually a publication from the Nevada Bureau of Mines. It's a little bit older, but it's pretty spectacular to read. It has some interesting examples of how people can be taken in. And it's very real, and we always pull this one up at the beginning because it's a good reminder that not everybody is as ethical as we'd hope them to be. Mining issuers, you'll hear me say the word issuers, it just means companies. There's about 2,900 issuers globally, and about 60 to 65% of them report in Canada. So that means a majority of the world is reporting and using the standards that are National Instrument 43-101. Just so you know, I'm a colossal nerd. The little Canada flag ball is 60% the size of the global ball. This is my favorite slide ever, and it's relatively new. So National Instrument 43-101, which I'll describe more in a minute, is part of Canadian securities law. And securities law, as I said, is to protect investors. And it's from unfair, improper, or fraudulent practices. And our goal here at the BCSC, as it is with any of the jurisdictional bodies across Canada, is to foster fair and efficient capital markets. The following is a mantra that we like to use about disclosure about mineral projects. It should be consistent, it should be comparable, and I don't mean you should be able to compare a gold project to a lithium project. It means that you should have the same information about projects no matter what you're looking at. And it should be decision useful information. So you should be able to inform yourself whether you want to invest in a gold project or a lithium project or a copper project. In Canada, of course, we're a little bit different than the United States. We have 13 different agencies that regulate across the country. We don't have one regulator like the SEC. All of the 13 bodies across Canada report to their provincial or territorial governments. They're generally self-funded, which means we're not paid by taxpayer dollars. We raise funds on our own from issuers who are listed on stock exchanges and file documents. British Columbia, Alberta, Ontario, and Quebec regulate the majority of mining issuers. That's the 1,900 or so that report in Canada. And companies have what we call a principal regulator. Principal regulator is where your home office is, where you're domiciled, to use the securities language law. So if you have a headquarters in Vancouver, you are principally regulated by British Columbia. If you have a headquarters in Toronto, you're principally regulated by Ontario. If you're not homed in Canada, you may have an affiliation through a law firm or a postal address in one of the jurisdictions, and that would determine your principal regulator. Overall, the 13 of these bodies come together as the Canadian Securities Administrators, or as we just abbreviate it to the CSA, and it helps us to harmonize and be consistent in our regulation across the country. And we do develop the national instruments such as 43-101. Just so that everybody's aware, we do have technical staff, much like the SEC does. We have 8 technical staff across British Columbia, Ontario, and Quebec. 4 people here in British Columbia, including myself, 2 in Ontario, 2 in Quebec. I think my Ontario colleagues are on this presentation today. And then in Alberta, they have the energy group, where they also have geoscientists and engineers who regulate oil and gas rule, which is National Instrument 51-101, which I won't talk about more. But there are 8 of us. So when we have over 1,300 companies to regulate, that divides up for a lot of companies for each person who works on the teams. Not only Canada has mining disclosure standards like 43101, this is a map courtesy of CRISCO, which is the international organization. All of the little notations here show you the various countries. There's a couple omitted here. Philippines is a member as well. So most of the world these days is being covered by consistent definitions that are applied through various organizations. In the US, SME is the member of CRISCO representing the United States. In Canada, CIM, the Canadian Institute of Mining, Metallurgy and Petroleum, is the Canadian member, and they help out the CSA and the BCSC. So this is just giving you a sense of how mining disclosure, mineral project disclosure is becoming very more united. We like to call it, I like to call it the CRISCO family. And it's now covering, I think, greater than 85% of the world. And there is a list of countries that are wanting to join the CRISCO regime and report things in a similar manner and have similar disclosure standards. National Instrument 43101 itself has 3 parts. There's 2 parts that are law. They're on the left, the National Instrument itself, and the Form 43101 F1. It's the technical report framework. And then coming up from the bottom there, the definition standards, which come from CIM, and those are adapted from the CRISCO definitions, the international definitions. They're incorporated by reference into the national instrument. And then the third piece on the right in the blue colors is the companion policy to 43101, the 43101 CP. That's also augmented by the CIM practice guidelines. I should have deleted the word best. They're moving away from the word best. It's industry standards and practice guidelines that come from people that are intimately still involved directly in the business. Now, of course, on the left, the law must be followed. So this is a disclosure thing. 43101 for the longest time was the only disclosure standard that was part of law, but with the adoption of SK 1300, the SEC standard is also a law now that must be followed. Things like the JORC and the PERC and the SAMREC codes are not part of securities law. And guidance that comes in the form of the companion policy should be followed, but it'll also tell you how we at any of the commissions throughout the CSA would interpret disclosure standards. And we do work together, and we do try to be consistent in our application of the rule. The objective, as I talked about before, is protecting investors or hopefully providing them with information to make informed decisions. It requires that the public reporting of mineral projects is balanced, it's understandable, it's based on verified data, it's based on reasonable assumptions if assumptions are made, and uses standardized definitions and terms like those that come out of CRISCO through organizations such as SME or CIM. What it's not, unfortunately, it's very much looking like a brand these days. It isn't a brand. We do find a lot of people coming to us often saying they told us they have a 43101 report. If it's not filed on our CEDAR Plus system, which is similar to the US's EDGAR system, it's not really a 43101 report. It's somebody who may have adopted this because it's so commonly used. It's also not a guarantee of good work. It places the obligations on a company to have work done and approved and supervised and prepared by a qualified person, a QP. And this is not telling you how to do the work. The 43101 standard only tells you how to disclose the work that you've done. It's also not a cookbook or a recipe for mineral resource or reserve estimation. The rule sets out standards for how you disclose those things. It doesn't tell you how to estimate them. If you want to look to how to estimate resources and reserves, you should look to some of the practice organizations around the world that put out the practice guidelines, such as CIM. We point people to those all the time. It is also not a vetting process by any regulatory agency, such as the BCSC or any other member of the CSA. Just because a technical report or news release is filed on our CDAR Plus system, it does not mean that it's been reviewed, and it does not mean that it complies with the national reporting standards. It is a company's responsibility to go forward, use a QP, and follow the rules of disclosure. When we say that we don't review everything that's filed, I'll show in a few minutes how many technical reports are filed in an average year, and you'll understand that the 8 of us just possibly can't get through them all. But over a 3-year rolling average, we do review about 50 to 60% of reports that are filed. And we don't see all news releases, but we do scan and review news releases, and we respond to complaints about things like news releases and slide decks and promotion in any other way quite often. To summarize what 43101 is really for, and this would be the key takeaway. A lot of people make it very complicated, and they look at other things like SK 1300 or JORC and its Table 1, or some of the SAMRAC, PERC, other international codes. Disclosure is for the public, also known as non-experts. It's not for other geos or other engineers. It should be, at its core, a description and disclosure and discussion, communication to the public of what work has been done on a mineral project, what are the results of that work, and what do they mean, an interpretation, and what are the plans for the next steps. It's so that investor, that reasonable person who is a member of the public, can make a decision about whether this is the investment for them. 43101 and any of the other codes provides a framework to disclose this information in a consistent manner, and that's what we intend it to be. There are some core elements of 43101, the main one being a qualified person, which of course is the designation of the MMSA. If you're a member of MMSA, you are a qualified person, and you are recognized actually as a qualified person under 43101. As I talked about, adapted from the CRISCO definitions, the international definitions, another core element of 43101 are those definition standards that are consistent. And those are things like mineral resources, indicated, measured, and reserves, proven and probable. I forgot inferred. Sorry about that. And then we may point people to the CIM practice guidelines to also make sure that they're considering whether they're following industry standards. And then, of course, our technical report. Currently, under SK 1300, you're referring to technical reports equivalents as technical report summary. But when I say technical report today, I will be referring to a Form 43101 F1 report. But what does all of this mean? What counts, and where are some of the common mistakes that people encounter? Under 43101, and I will say how this is different, or how we see it as different to SK 1300 in a few minutes. Disclosure means any oral statement or written information made on or by or on behalf of a company. It's intended to be made public, and it's shared and made available in a jurisdiction of Canada. So, the internet has only made our lives better or more difficult, hard to say. And it doesn't matter that the information is filed on CDAR Plus or not. It could be on somebody's website. It could be on their Instagram or Facebook. We're even seeing mining project disclosure now on TikTok. One of the fun things that we get criticized for often here in British Columbia is spelling Columbia and the country wrong. And one of the reasons we put on the bottom right there of your screen, there's a cover page from a technical report where somebody who's acting as a QP obviously doesn't know how to spell the country of Columbia. We get criticized for making that mistake in our presentations quite often. So we throw that one up there to show that sometimes qualified persons do it too. That's just a fun one for us when we show this slide. Well, how does this happen? What happens? There's a lot of data, there's a lot of work, whether you're grassroots, green fields, rock hammer, driving around in a pickup truck, taking samples, all the way up to mining, either open pit or underground, or even closure. There's a lot of data collected. We focus on making sure that people follow industry practice, best practices, practice guidelines, however you want to term them. We point people to CIM to make sure they understand what they should be doing, and we encourage them to get qualified persons involved early in the process before they have to make disclosure. And when they disclose all of the data that they collect, no matter what stage of a mineral project they're at, that their data, their analyses, and their plans for the future are disclosed in whatever medium, but they're disclosed following that standard. So we like to show this picture, just a little bit of a funnel. All those little balls represent the various pieces of data, and they get distilled out to be that consistent, comparable, and decision useful information that a QP is charged with taking responsibility for disclosing it in the right manner in the framework. This is the simplest path of how disclosure is made, and all the little balls are stars that are technical reports. We're not naive enough to know that every mineral project follows this path. We've been criticized a number of times saying that this is very simplistic, but this is just an overview of the disclosure path. You can start with a greenfields project, and we know the statistics that come out of the Colorado School of Mines saying that only 1 in 10,000 prospects will move out of that exploration portfolio or stage and move into a production cycle or finally. There's lots of ways this can evolve, but this is the very basic path and the different kinds of technical reports that we might see. And there's different parts of the rule that might be necessary to be engaged when you're making this disclosure. So exploration, there's no trigger for a technical report at the exploration stage unless it's a material project to the company that owns it. If they're seeking a listing or they're doing something exciting and they have some great results, they might have to file a technical report associated with that new listing on a stock exchange. But often we see exploration reports filed as voluntary reports. The first time disclosure of mineral resources, that next step, and the first time disclosure of a preliminary economic assessment, which might be the third step, and then the disclosure of mineral reserves are all first time disclosure of those elements will trigger a technical report. A technical report can also be triggered by a material change to any of those disclosures. The move towards production, however, does not trigger a technical report. These are things that are often misunderstood, and there's a whole series of triggers in the instrument itself under section 4.2. I think there are 11 different triggers under section 4.2 right at the moment. So those are things that you should be aware of. And the other thing to be aware of is not all technical reports were often identified here in Canada as having independence requirements. Not all technical reports are required to be independent. It's something to look at in the instrument itself, because we don't have time to cover it all here today, is what are the triggers and which of those triggers require independent QPs, meaning not working for the company or not having direct ties to the company. But we recognize that you may jump back and forth between these stages of development, and that's just fine. You can file updated or revised technical reports, and you can move back and forth between these stages as a company sees fit. That's a business decision on their part. Pardon me, I have a little bit of a cold. I just need to take a drink of water here before my voice cracks anymore. The key elements and the basics of a technical report is it's a summary. Anything in blue, we really want people to take a good note of. It's a summary of the scientific and technical information about a project. If you are doing, say, a preliminary feasibility study or a feasibility study, and you write the technical report, the 43101 technical report that goes with that, that is just a summary of such a study. I like to say that a feasibility or even a pre-feasibility study, if you were to print it all out and put it in binders, could be 1 Vicky high, which is which is about 5'5". It could be that tall, but a technical report is a summary of what's in any study like that. It's the relevant information about a mineral project that a non-expert would need to know to make an investment decision. And that's the second part. The audience is the public and their advisors, who are, again, not mining experts. And that often leads to the question, how technical should a technical report be? Well, if you're going to use terms, and if you want to use reasonable terms, they should be explained and defined. Be consistent with any of the standard definitions. Again, things like inferred, indicated, measured resources, and probable and proven reserves. And it should be understandable for the public. So if you're using a new technique, a new analytical realm, if it's got a name or an acronym, you should be disclosing what that system is, how it works, and what the results mean, so that the public could understand what it is that you're doing. This goes back to the misconceptions about a technical report and that we don't review everything. Technical reports that are filed on our CDAR Plus system are not approved by the regulator. In fact, they show up, we see them, and we're like, interesting, I'll take a look at that. Again, this goes to 43101 is not a brand. Lots of people, like I suggest, will come to us and complain. They told us they had a 43101 report, so it must be a good project, or it must be about to go into production. The technical report is over 500 pages long, so it must be close to being in production. No, again, it's supposed to be a summary. I personally don't like to read technical reports that are 500 pages long. I don't think anybody does. So again, it's thinking about who is the audience, and that's the public. A lot of things come up. We see them on social media. Curtis Clark and I were talking about this earlier today, about feasibility studies and how they fall down. Again, it's a summary. How could a project fail? It had a 43101 report. It's a summary document of something like a feasibility study. The key things to remember is 43101 is a disclosure standard, a framework for making mineral project disclosure. It's not a technical standard. It doesn't tell you how to do the work, and it's not a measure of merit. The QP is giving their professional opinion that everything is right and okay. Here's an example of last year, 2023. There were 638 technical reports filed on CDAR Plus. That's a fair bit. That's just under an average year. We're a little bit off that mark so far this year. We might have fewer than that filed in 2024. But this just gives you a sense, and we try to follow what's going on in the technical reports that are filed. Most of the project locations are around the world. There's only about 40 to 45% of projects located in Canada, and that reflects that the companies that report, that 60 to 65% that report through and under 43101, they're global. Mexico, Argentina, Australia, Peru, Colombia, Chile, they all show up, but Canada and US are usually the top two. Primary commodity last year was weird. Normally gold takes up half of all the technical reports that were filed. It dropped a little bit. Last year, lithium jumped into second place. Normally it's copper. Lithium edged out copper just a little bit last year. And then by the development stage, that sweeping arrow path, it's split pretty evenly between those early stage grassroots greenfields projects and resource projects. So less work, less advanced, not moving down that curve. And then we see preliminary economic assessments, mineral reserves, which may be disclosed in either a pre-feasibility study or a feasibility study. And then some of those in production projects, they make up the rest of the technical reports that were filed. So of those 638 technical reports last year, right now, about 400 of those were filed in BC. So myself and the team of 4 of us, including me, we've reviewed so far of those reports, we've reviewed about 125 of those 400. So that will increase over the next 2 years or so as we get through them. We do review as many as we possibly can, but we can't do all of them. We need a lot more people, and that would be unwieldy to say the least. One of the other things that people fail to do when they're writing technical reports, and we've made a cheat sheet here, the technical report form, which is available from any of the jurisdictions on our websites, but I'll give you the BCSC one at the end of the presentation. There are 9 instructions at the beginning of the form, and they're there to help you. We're going to emphasize again that it's a summary document. So again, it doesn't have to be 500 pages. It should use plain language, meaning it should be understandable. And it describes to you what items in the form are required for what level of project. The instructions are one of the most critical parts of preparing a technical report, and we highly recommend that people read them. And people will say, well, there's no guidance on whether I should use appendices or not. And we're like, yeah, there is. Instruction 8 of the form. So it's there to help anybody who wants to be an author, the qualified person who's preparing a technical report. We can't stress enough, if you're struggling to know what should be included and that, please read the form. There are some helpful instructions there for you. These are the 27 items. And again, I'm going to talk a little bit about SK 1300, which has 25 sections. These are the items that are required in a technical report. Those items in the blue box, items 15 through 22, are only required for advanced projects. Those are projects at the PEA, the preliminary feasibility, or the feasibility study level. They can be omitted if you're an early stage or a resource stage project. Common mistakes that we see, and I'm going to highlight some. These are just the broad strokes, but then I'll tell you the ones that are that we see most often. One of the biggest problems is the report isn't addressed to the company. It has to be done for the company. Lots of people like to sell their mineral projects with the technical report already prepared. That's not technically complying with the rule. We want to see companies having done work, having been really invested, not just getting perhaps a turnkey solution that they're going to flip over to someone else. We want to see that a QP has done a current personal inspection that has covered the work that's been done on the property, or that they set the effective date of a technical report to include up into the time that they visited the property. The other thing we see, and it's hard to imagine in this digital age, illegible figures. When you zoom into 800% and you still can't read a map, that's a bit of a problem. We see lots of restricted disclosure, which are 4 parts of 43-101 that are found in section 2.3, and missing cautionary language and statements whenever those are required. And then copy and pasting resource or reserve estimates that were done by another QP, and a QP who doesn't have that knowledge and experience tries to take responsibility for them. You'll be able to go back to this, and of course I'll be providing these slides to the MMSA, and this is a checklist that you can use to walk through and look at the various elements that are in the technical report. This is not an exhaustive list, but these are some of the things that we like to give out as a checklist. If you come by our booth at Roundup, we're always there. If you're at the Roundup Conference in Vancouver at the end of January every year, we actually have this checklist, and we can discuss and point you to the right parts of the form. But we do use this, and it is useful. I won't walk through them because I want to make sure that we get through the slides, and I was sure I had too many, and I possibly do, but I want to leave lots of time for questions. The top 5 disclosure deficiencies in a technical report. We allow QPs to rely on other experts, but it's a limited reliance. It's not a disclaimer, and they can only rely on experts that are involved in legal, political, environmental, or tax matters. It cannot be relying on another geologist, relying on another engineer. People mix that up a lot. And it's very clear in the form, so you can also rely on the company that you're working for if you're authoring a technical report for some of this information, but it's got to be the legal, political, environmental, or tax information only. Data verification is also a big problem, a lack of data verification from the QPs, and the QP's opinion on the adequacy of the data. These are not new slides for us. These move around, these top 5 move around a little bit. This is still the current status. I checked today. These top 5 disclosure deficiencies come from our review database, which is about 1,750 reviews right at the moment. The other problems are sample preparation, analysis, and security, missing information about QA/QC. Missing information about analytical procedures, not discussing good assay results, poor assay results, not talking about where the analyses were performed. Lots of problems with drilling information. As you can see, it's all given there. And one of the other items that's in all technical reports, adjacent properties. Adjacent properties are 2 things. One, they're a property that the company, the issuer, has no interest in, and lack of cautionary language. We say that you can show that you're in a right neighborhood or a right district by looking at the properties around you, but you have to say that that may not reflect what you find on the property that the report is about. Flipping back to just the instrument itself, some of these show up in the disclosure in a technical report as well, but they can be in PowerPoint presentations, news releases, verbal presentations. Beaver Creek was that only last week? Oh my goodness, it was only last week that people did all those presentations. We do allow you to talk about historical estimates, previous work that was done on projects by previous companies. That's probably the most prescriptive part of the instrument. It should also be included, if you're going to do that, under item 6, history in a technical report. And in 43-101 under section 2.4, historical estimates have 7 requirements. It's a checklist. It's one of the only things in the instrument that is a checklist. And if you're going to disclose a historical estimate, you need to include all 7 key pieces of information there, including some cautionary language. Section 3.3, disclosure of exploration information. This is the one that we see causing greatest problems in news releases. Disclosure of mineral resources or mineral reserves. We see uncategorized, so no inferred, indicated, measured, probable, proven. Data verification. Data verification is also required outside of technical reports. And then again, restricted disclosure, the 4 parts of restricted disclosure that we see under 2.31A, or A through D, are the most common. Cautionary language for inferred resources when doing a PEA. This also talks about exploration targets, gross metal values, adding inferred to other categories. Lots of stuff in there to be aware of, and I highly recommend checking those out. Some of the most common other issues, sort of like we started at the front of technical report problems, we see people, particularly in slide decks, PowerPoints such as this, they compare their project to other projects at a different stage, which may give the public a sense of value. If you have an early stage project without even a resource, I don't think you should be comparing that to a project in production. You can't make estimates. You can't say it has an NPV. You don't have anything to do that. So even if you do have a project at a PEA stage, a preliminary economic assessment with an economic analysis, you should probably not be comparing that to a project with reserves and that has, demonstrated technical and economic viability that a PEA doesn't have. We see a lot of disclosure of metal equivalents with 100% recovery. That's going to overstate the metal every time. Grade times width. This is one that gets geologists back up all the time. Grade times width, when you disclose it in a table of your assay values, makes numbers look bigger. Grade times width is commonly used for trend analysis and or prospectivity, which is fine. The general public doesn't understand it that way. If you're going to disclose things with grade times width, put maybe a contoured section so people can see where mineralization appears to be vectoring towards. But putting it in a table just makes numbers look bigger. And we see that with third-party disclosure that does comparisons of bar charts of grade times width. And people believe that these things and intercepts, drill intercepts, grade times width, that they have value or they're better than one to the other. And that can be a problem for the public who doesn't understand what grade times width may be used for. Data verification disclaimers, failing to name the QP when disclosure is made. Overly promotional disclosure, again, you've just established your first mineral resource estimate and it's primarily inferred and you've got a little bit of indicated, and then you go and tell the public you're nearing production. You don't even have an economic analysis yet. How could you be nearing production? We also see the words world class all the time. It's amazing how many world class projects they are. I'm sure everyone on this call, world class projects show themselves very quickly and very readily, but it's amazing how many prospects are world class. And then when cautionary language is required, it needs to be proximal and prominent. It can't be buried as a teeny tiny footnote that you need to zoom in to 800% to do. We don't. People like to tweet things with the short bit.ly hyperlinks. You can make sure that a tweet, and it's 180 characters or whatever it is, you can actually link to something that may contain the required cautionary language. And what happens if all of this goes on and you do everything you can and your disclosure still doesn't comply? There's a bunch of possible outcomes. The 8 technical staff across the CSA, our job is to help you. We won't teach you how to do it, but we will correct you and ask you to correct your disclosure and follow the rules. We'll be specific. We'll identify the parts of the rule that you've contravened. You might have to issue a clarifying news release. You might have to amend and refile a technical report. We might make you take a PowerPoint presentation off your website. There's various other means, but they're the first stage. We will ask you to fix your disclosure first. We can make mistakes. We are known to be wrong. We may have missed something. You can ask us or tell us that we missed something or that we've got it wrong. We do take that feedback. And there are then, if it does escalate way down the road, and this is definitely not our first step, we could cease trade the company. We can also refer to our enforcement group for further investigation. What I like to say is the technical staff, we're the guardrails to keep you on the road. We may find problems with your disclosure, but we're going to tell you what they are, and we're going to ask you to fix them. If our enforcement gang gets involved, they're actually the police that might pull you over, pull you out of the car, and do something far more drastic. But we're the guardrails on the road, and our enforcement groups are the police. But you start out by hitting one of the guardrails, and we're going to try to give you some guidance on how to fix your disclosure. And that usually comes in the form of a comment letter that's sent to the company. As I said, it will outline the specific concerns that we have, request the company explain. Sometimes we'll just ask for an explanation. If we don't get it, perhaps the public does not either, and so we may ask you to just put in some clarifications or add some additional information. We do ask you to do this in a timely manner. We'll ask for a response within 5 to 10 business days, and we may pursue further action if we can't get a company to correct its disclosure. That was a lot. Now, this is entirely our view here in Canada. I am not an SK 1300 expert. I don't think anyone of the technical staff at the CSA would say that they are, but we do see some differences between 43101 and SK 1300. So they're not the same. 43101 has been in place since 2001, and the team at the SEC looked at both 43101 and some of the other standards. As you would all well know, in the US, it took effect January 1st, 2021. It was voluntary prior to that for a short period of time. And I think everybody's thrilled that the SEC has moved a long way from Industry Guide 7. The biggest thing, of course, being recognizing mineral resources. SK 1300 is considered part of the CRISCO family, so it brought a lot of mineral project disclosure to be more consistent with things like 43101 and JORC. And as I said, it is the second disclosure standard that's part of securities law. So we have somebody else other than us Canadians. The biggest differences that we see, and we see four really, 43101 applies to all companies. You can be a private company and you're making public disclosure, and it applies to all documents and oral statements. SK 1300 only applies to registrants that have listings, and it only applies to core documents, so offering documents, financial documents, annual reports. 43101 requires the consistent, comparable, and decision useful information for everything. So SK 1300 doesn't apply to slide decks, PowerPoint presentations. 43101 is predicated on the individual qualified person. We do not have a single sign-off regime. SK 1300 has that single sign-off. It may be signed off by a company, a consultant, a group. The Canadian unique element, we have those sometimes independence requirements for technical reports. SK 1300 doesn't. Technical reports under 43101 are milestone driven. Those stars on that sweeping arrow again, those are triggers when you achieve a milestone or when one of those milestones changes. That's what triggers a technical report. Whereas SK 1300, a technical report summary, is a continuous disclosure standard. It must be reviewed or filed annually. You've got to look at it continuously, whereas a technical report might be considered current for a good number of years and doesn't need to be replaced until a new milestone is achieved or that milestone has changed. This is a very simplistic view. Again, primarily my view. So I'm not an SK 1300 expert, but this is something that we get asked about all the time. This is a courtesy of a law firm in the US, Sherman and Sterling. It's a really good comparison of the 25 items of a technical report summary in SK 1300 versus the 27 items of a 43101 F1 technical report. The orange shaded boxes in the middle are the advanced stage properties, those ones that were in the blue box before that I had shown, that are for advanced stage properties as we refer to them here. Under 43101. There's a couple of versions of this table. This is just the one that I had most readily at hand when I was making the slides. It's a great reference. And again, I didn't make the slide, so all credit to the folks that did. And we do get asked this question all the time. Can we do one report to cover both SK 1300 and 43101? Short answer, no. We've yet to see it work out. And while the reports are very similar, they're different enough to not be the same. One of the things that can happen is you may be able to file your technical report summary from SK 1300 if you're what's called a multi-jurisdictional filer. The MJDS standard, multi-jurisdictional disclosure standard, is for those companies that are more developed, have been around for a while, and they can go cross-border without filing both documents. So if you're domiciled in the US and you're eligible for MJDS, you can file your technical report summary under SK 1300 as an addendum to your annual report. You do not file it as a 43101 technical report in Canada. And conversely, a Canadian domiciled company can file their 43101 report in the US if they are MJDS eligible. Not all companies are. It's got some revenue barriers and a few other things. You would have to talk to your legal counsel to figure out how you're doing that. But unfortunately, sometimes you will have to craft, if you're not MJDS eligible and reporting in both jurisdictions, you might have to craft both reports. Our thought is it is easier to craft the 43101 first and then the SK 1300, but there's a lot of differing opinion on that. That's just what we think. We're not preparing the reports, so just our opinion and our viewpoint on that one. What's next for mineral project disclosure? I'm almost wrapped up. We've got a lot of things going on. As for CRISCO has a new some new definitions coming out. They've been published. I think their approval is coming up very shortly, if it hasn't already. It might be next month. I think it's October. I'm looking at the calendar to my left. There is a new version of JORC that is out for comment right now. You can go to the JORC sites in websites in Australia, and you can review their current status, and you can provide comments and feedback on the JORC code if you choose to do so. And we have a policy, what we refer to as a policy project. And last October, so almost a year ago, we began a policy project to modernize and enhance 43101, the Form 43101 F1, and its companion policy. It is not intended to be major changes, but it is intended to be some clarifications. If we can, remove information or remove requirements that are no longer necessary, and perhaps provide more assistance to the industry as they prepare technical reports and mineral project disclosure. We're not quite there yet. Targeted and public consultations will be part of the process when we propose revisions. And we want to focus on clarity, efficiency, and again, if you didn't notice me say summary for technical reports, the length of technical reports is very important. Some of the areas that are being considered, these were put forth in a consultation paper, which we gave to the public with 38 questions in 2022. And we asked about alignment with other codes, such as SK 1300, JORC, the CRISCO template, things about exploration targets, equivalent grades, and things like that. Data verification, which I've already touched on, historical estimates, which caused lots of problem in their disclosure, preliminary economic assessments. Those reports, we've always been criticized for having a definition of what a preliminary economic assessment isn't, as opposed to what it is. We hope that we can provide some further clarification to qualified persons definition, the current personal inspection requirements. We have a deferral right now for seasonal weather conditions. We'll see whether that's something that's retained or removed. Mineral resource and mineral reserve estimation. One of the things that might be changing is reasonable prospects for eventual economic extraction might be losing the word eventual, but that's a kind of a CRISCO and for us here in Canada, a CIM thing. Environmental and social disclosure, ESG, of course, being top of mind for just about everyone. The rights of Indigenous peoples, UNDRIP from the United Nations, of course. Any enhancements to capital and operating costs and economic analyses. And we also threw open for any other comments about 43101. As I said, it's just about a year ago that we started this process. We still have more work to do. None of this will result in changes that don't have further public input. We also have an advisory committee here in Canada called MTAC, which is the Mining Technical and Advisory and Monitoring Committee that helps the CSA staff. We hope to publish proposed changes ahead of the PDAC conference. So we hope to publish in February of 2025. For those of you who don't know, PDAC always occurs at the beginning of March. We will continue to hold short courses and presentations, and there will be many more when we propose revisions. So it's not necessarily a quick process, but we're trying to get this done to help industry as soon as we possibly can. And some of the key resources that we have a mining page where you can find the instrument, the form, the companion policy. You can find our slide deck from our most recent full day short course. CEDAR Plus, our equivalent of Edgar, where you can find it, how you can get to it. And if you want to look up the international definitions, the link to CRISCO, I should have put in our CIM, but you guys have your own guidelines, and you also have SME, and I know MMSA has lots of resources as well. And I think that's it. So I could stop sharing my screen and we can do questions.
Great. Thank you so much, Victoria. We already have one question in the chat here. Everyone else, feel free to add more questions to the chat if you have any. From Marco, according NI 43101, the estimation of mineral resources does not include economic analysis. In contrast, SEC SK 1300 considers it.
Yep. What's the question? That is another difference. The initial assessment, as in SK 1300, it's slightly different than what we would call a PEA. Again, that's some of the variability between the two disclosure standards. I don't know whether there's more that anyone would like to ask about that.
All right, my question, thanks again so much for putting this together, for one thing. My question's around kind of that brand that you talked about for the 43101. Like, I'm a consultant and I'm constantly asked to do 43101 reports for properties that aren't for Canadian listed companies and so on. what is kind of the restriction or the thought around? I've defaulted to calling them like, technical reports in the format of an NI 43-101 report, but is that kind of an appropriate thing to do? What is the kind of standard practice or thought around that?
That's kind of a tricky question, but I love it. What I would say, Patrick, is that it's not really a 43-101 technical report unless it ends up filed on CEDAR Plus. So if you choose to follow the framework that is in Form 43-101 F1 and provide someone with a report, it would be really up to you, and I think you're doing kind of the right thing. We can enforce that you don't follow the framework. Like if you choose to follow that framework, that's great. But I think it might behoove you to explain to the person who's asked you to do it that it's not really a 43-101 report and you're just following the framework of disclosure. But people do treat it as a brand, and they do make those assumptions that it means it's a good property or that it's going to go into production or something like that. I guess it's the problem of being popular. People want to emulate you. I guess we're like knockoff Gucci bags or something like that. I don't. It's a little bit problematic, and we do get a lot of complaints from the public that say, well, they gave us a 43-101 report and it's some little company from nowhere, and they've crafted something, but it doesn't really look like a 43-101 report. So your concept of calling it, just a geologic report or a technical report about a project is probably the best way to go. I don't know whether that helps you or not.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's exactly what I was wondering. Perfect. Thank you so much.
Great. And Victoria, do you have a few extra minutes here? We did get some more questions coming through.
Yeah, for sure. For
Great.
sure.
Sue Ellen asked, can you go back to ESG and Indigenous tribes?
One of the things that we have already, there is room for disclosure of ESG and the rights of Indigenous peoples. I have to use the right words. In 43-101, there's discussions of property ownership. So if there are underlying, here in Canada, we call them First Nations, Inuit or Métis people, they have underlying land rights in many places. There are room to disclose that. We're trying to review and determine whether more is required there. We also have already existing under, that would be under item 4, by the way, also under item 4, 5, and 20 of a technical report, there's room to talk about environmental permits, environmental management, reclamation, all of those things. There's already room and requirements to disclose things there. We're reviewing what other requirements might be necessary, or whether a technical report should have all of that information, or whether it should be somewhere else. We try not to, in 43-101, not to duplicate other processes. Canada's regulation, of course, being a little bit different than the US's, where you might have state permitting through like the forest departments and things like that. We have ministries of natural resources or ministries of the environment, which grant permits and things like that. So 43-101 is not meant to duplicate that information, but we're trying to figure out what other environmental or Indigenous rights information should go in a technical report. It's a big project. It's a big element. I think all of the international codes and the disclosure standards are trying to figure out how that should be incorporated into the disclosure around technical reports and any other disclosure around mineral projects. I hope that answers the question there.
Are you able to?
Yeah. Yeah, thank you very much for that, Victoria. That does help. I may be entering in a project here in Colorado, working with the Commerce Department. I was asked to call and see if we can work in. It's really difficult here in Colorado working with the indigenous tribes, and so this has been very helpful for me. Thank you.
It's very complicated everywhere, and I think here in Canada, and this comes from my involvement with the Roundup Conference in past years, in Canada, mining and exploration is the largest employer of Indigenous peoples after government, and it does provide economic opportunity. And I think everyone in the mining and exploration world knows and respects that we have to work with Indigenous peoples. And I think it's a challenge to make sure we do things the right way. And so the CSA, as we look to revise 43-101 and again modernize it, enhance and recognize what's going on today, this is a big part of what we're doing.
Yeah. Well, this webinar came by surprise for me today, and at a perfect time too. So thank you so much. I so appreciate it.
Well, if you're reporting in Canada, one of those things that's on the link, those key resources, and again, I will get the slides to the MMSA, but if you go to our website, my email and the other members of my team, you're welcome to email, call us, and we'll give you advice. We do pick up the phone. We respond to all the emails that we get. So we're very open to questions all the time. If we don't answer you today, feel free to reach out in the future. If we can be of help, we'll do our best to do so.
And that's the email that I've gotten that you guys sent me today. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, that's very nice to know.
Great.
I think, Kristen, there's one about the AAC guidance or something similar on capital estimation. We did ask a question in 2022 on our consultation paper where we were seeking feedback. We did ask very specifically about whether we should be talking to AACE estimation guidelines and that sort of thing. So that's definitely something that we're considering. One of the things that we also hope to do, which would be new and we're working on, and you're not the first group to hear this, I've said this a couple of times, our companion policy, which is our guidance to the instrument itself and to the form for technical reports, we're hoping to add a new section in the companion policy, which is guidance to the form, because right now the guidance is only to the instrument. So hopefully we will be able to provide some guidance to cost estimates and things like that. And we are definitely thinking about things like AACE.
Great. And it looks like there's one last question here from Curtis. There is a perception that policing of misbehaving issues is inadequate. Perhaps meta statistics could be publicized on how many sanctions were imposed and how severe the sanctions were.
My pleasure.
That's a good one. We did, in our consultation paper, we did get a lot of feedback that we had to do more enforcement. We do here in BC, we tend to do around the reviews of around 200 issuers, 200 companies per year. Not all of those have deficiencies. Most of them are corrected quickly. We do put out some statistics. Every second year, the CSA puts out a report about what was done and that sort of thing. We don't end up with the top tier of enforcement, which we refer to here commonly as the hearing room. Very few of our mining companies end up in the hearing room, which doesn't mean that they don't do bad things, but we can correct their disclosure. We can help them correct their disclosure and advise them how to do that. But we do the CSA does every 2 years put out statistics on what was done and where, and then we try to put out guidance on what was done. We try to make ourselves available for these short courses, and we try to talk about in a much greater way when we do a full day short course or even half day short courses. We talk about some of the sanctions that have been given out for poor behavior. One of the ones on if your disclosure doesn't comply that I didn't touch on, if a qualified person, our definition, not MMSA, because there's another question about that in the chat. If a qualified person doesn't correct things, or we think there's a problem and it might revolve around their practice, we don't weigh in. We would provide a concern or a complaint to their professional association. So we do a little bit on sort of the metrics or the statistics of what we do, but we do provide again every second year some statistics on what the enforcement levels are.
I think
there's a
Bill
couple
just
more.
wanted to clarify that MMSA has 2 levels of members: regular members, as well as QP members that require additional requirements relative to their areas of experience.
That's great. Thanks, Bill. And we only recognize the QP level. We don't recognize the regular member level. If you're ever looking for it, I had it at the ready. It's not going to show out well because I have my background blurred, but in our companion policy, we have a list. And the list shows that MMSA, and it's the level of QP there. So I had it folded open for that reason, but you can't see it. I always have it at the ready. I'm a little old school. My age starts with a 5, so I still have paper on my desk. It's not all digital.
Let's see. Tony here says, can you go into a bit more detail on what it would take to upgrade historical drill data to 43101 standards?
Yeah, I can. So historical drill data doesn't need to be upgraded. It's up to the qualified person to determine whether they can verify it, if they can still see it, if they have core logs. Historical estimates are different. We don't talk about data as historical or current. We talk about data as data is data. If you are acting as a qualified person authoring a technical report, it's your professional judgment. If you can find the core, if you can find the reports, if you can find the assays and that sort of thing, and you've done verification, you've looked at it and you feel confident that it's still usable, it doesn't matter if you drilled it in the 1940s, although I might say analytical methods have changed a little bit, but that's up to you. So we don't distinguish between historical data or modern data. We say data is data. It's up to you.
Great. And then it looks like here from Donald, is there a published list of prescribed promotional terms such as world-class that you mentioned? I got slapped for inserting bonanza to describe grade and historical workings as described in the old published report. It would be good to have a list that we can check. For example, is there a big difference between bonanza and high grade? I see the latter in many reports.
Well, okay, so I know that a lot of people believe a bonanza grade is an ounce per short ton, I guess. In the land of metric, 34 grams per metric ton. Bonanza causes problems. Just in the concept, people think, the Wild West in the 1800s kind of thing. There isn't a specific list. Most of the exchanges could tell you a specific list. Here in Canada, we also have an organization that reviews news releases, which is an independent body that the exchanges fund. It used to be called IROC, now it's called CIRO, CIRO. Please don't ask me to tell you what the acronym is, but it's the monitoring organization. It changes so readily, I never get it right. But we do in our full short course, if you download off our our presentation, there is one slide and it talks about world class, and that high grade usually needs to be quantified. So high grade will require them to say, when we say high grade, we mean black compared to X. So if they're saying high grade, they need to quantify that normally so that the public understands, because the public doesn't really have an interpretation or a benchmark for bonanza, and it's not a defined term.
Great. Many thanks to Victoria Yehl for her excellent presentation. Thanks so much for attending the webinar. We are working to confirm our webinar for October. You will get notice of our upcoming webinars as details are finalized. The webinars are generally scheduled for the third Friday of each month. All of our webinars are uploaded to YouTube and can be accessed through the mmsa.net website. The video of this webinar will be on the website within a week. The MMSA webinars are supported by the MMSA Jacqueline Foundation. We'll send you a notice when the video and slides are posted on the MMSA website. The webinar is now ended. Thank you so much.